Okay, I'm going to start. Welcome everybody. Welcome to those of you who were here last night. Welcome to those of you who watched the video, and welcome to those of you who are joining for the first time. And thank you everybody for your comments yesterday in the chat, for your questions, for filling in the feedback form. Having a read through of that. It's really great to receive. Yeah, and also for those who stayed into the breakouts afterwards yesterday, I had some really rich conversations. So thank you for that. Hopefully today we'll get the breakouts working during the main session as well. Not sure what happened there, but hopefully it'll work today. So just a little bit of an intro. For the context, Rising Up's strategy process that was there 2017-18 when we were writing that had in it that we would do a strategy review in 2022, including looking at principles and values and the different things that were working to bring the strategy together. And although there were several strategy processes in the last few years, to me, this feels like this is the strategy review that we envisioned 4 or 5 years ago. And then the governing body of XR UK, the Hive, invited Gail and Skeena last autumn to have a look and a work on a longer term strategy for XR. So these presentations are partly a result of that calling in of something there. I'm just going to bring up the slides. Okay, can people just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides? Great. So we did the introductions last night. I'm not going to repeat that. Just to go over some of the tech issues again or logistics. You can message me or message Luke if you've got any tech issues. Please message privately because it's so much more obvious when that comes through. We'll be sharing the recording and the slides again tonight. You can follow this link for the Q&A to ask questions and make comments throughout the session. Again, the chat will be open. Use it, don't be distracted. And that's how you turn it off. There's a little arrow next to the chat and you can untick that bit. Go. Thanks for requesting the live transcription. So that's now enabled. Those who are helped by that. Take notes, write down your thoughts as they occur to you, because we'll be covering a lot, and I'm sure rich ideas will bubble up. So do write them down. We'll have a few pauses and breaks, and again, hopefully we'll have some breakouts. Just a recap, and sorry for the text-heavy slide, but this is what we're sort of looking at. We looked at last night is that we're aiming for a paradigm shift to reshape thousands of years of human patterning, not just changing a government policy. We talked about how actions without a strong vision have increasingly become the main focus, for example, in XR UK, in Insulate Britain, in Just Stop Oil. And that our position as being the change is that a broader strategy is needed. But a lack of clarity on this has resulted in tension in the movement. And by the movement, I'm referring just loosely the sort of movement to those who are aligned in some way and working in some way. You don't have to identify as a rebel or something to be part of the movement. We're saying that no one is bad or wrong, that we've done things and we believe things and we're doing things now. And we are learning from those things. And all of it is an opportunity for learning. We could either be succeeding or we're learning is a way to look at it. hopefully in the succeeding, we're also learning. And so we're here tonight articulating being the Change Affinity Network's position at this time. That can also change. It's an evolving thing. We're not here with a polished final thing. Integration is possible and many perspectives are sought. Is sought. Terrible grammar, Stu. Apologies. I think I had something else to say before this. This is the bit where I'm trying to do slideshow and other bits. Yeah, we're not here trying to discredit anyone's work. I'll emphasize that. There's value in so many ways, and what we're articulating is what we've tried to integrate and tried to learn and tried to get through. Part of what we're bringing, part of our approach includes a deep co-creation, a co-laboration or a collaboration with our family in the Global South, who bring knowledge systems, who bring a richness, who bring a leaderful approach. And many of what we're bringing is informed by that and in conversation with folk in the Global South and from the Global South. A lot of what we're bringing is not new. We're attempting to sort of integrate and weave things together and make an expression of things, especially bringing in the marginalized knowings and learnings. And we're bringing some complex ideas, right? We're bringing, it might be that we sometimes bring academic language, it might be that we bring theoretical parts, and some of that is we need to because we're talking about complex systems, complex ideas. Some of our language will need to speak about this, language being a tool, a biological tool in a sense, that we've co-evolved with language. And language is a thing that changes. And so sometimes we need to expand the language that we have, grapple with new concepts, new ideas, create new words in order to articulate the reality that we are sort of meeting in our senses, in our days, in our realities. And so we believe that the approach that we're offering does offer a leap towards truth, joy, love, and beauty. And that's hopefully, yeah, you'll gain a bit of that today and more of that tomorrow. So coming up today, we're going to cover why do we have a climate and ecological emergency and talk about a model for that, which will go into a model of what it is to be a human as well. I'll talk about some of the history and the context of what's evolved or what's brought us to this place over the last centuries and millennia. What we're learning about Homo sapiens, about humans, and then the Zoom gods willing, we'll come to a discussion space towards the end of the night. That's that. Okay. And now I'm going to pass over to Hobina, who I think I need to enable as a co-host to chat. So bear with me a moment, folks.
It's Kofi Stumer. Yeah.
Oh, is it Kofi?
Well, no, it might be Cobiner if he's here. Okay. To say it in his.
Actually, Cobiner isn't here, so it's going to be Kofi. Oh, Cobiner is just arriving. Cobiner, I'm making you a co-host so that you can unmute yourself, and you should be able to. Come on, let me see if I can stop screen share.
Some epic timing, mate.
Cobiner, are you there? You're up.
Yeah. Hi. So
Just hang fire a minute, mate. Your signal's a bit patchy. That's not just me, is it?
Sure. Can you hear me? And if you can hear, is this better?
That's
Yeah.
great. Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
It's not great. It says your bandwidth is low. I don't know if you can switch a network. Is there something you can do within 1 minute to try differently or get to a better spot?
Yeah. Okay.
That sounds okay.
Does it still sound okay?
Yeah, I think go for it.
Okay, it's just a short introduction to follow on from my brother Stuart's introduction. Greetings all. And this is just a bit of a reminder of what this is about for people that were here with us yesterday. And particularly just also to preserve the energy of this space. What we're doing in these sessions is not about trying to convince you all really about our perspectives or what we think the state of the world is, the experience of our communities, and how serious the climate and ecological crisis or the Ma'angamizi are. Some of you will know, some of you we're all on a learning process together. But for us in the BCAN team, these sessions are about explaining why giving some of the ideas and different perspectives about why we've been compelled to take this direction, explaining some of the ideas and many different types of thinking that have been marginalized, and the directions and actions that we've been developing and have actually been working on for years, and also intergenerationally for even longer still, in the different forms of resistance to the ongoing genocide and ecocide. And so that means for us, this is really about, outlining some of those perspectives and therefore, for people who are interested in that journey and in that learning, and for the fact that we now have a space where we can do some learning within our movement or within this movement, that by the end of this process, there is some practical moves and understandings about what this really means in practice. But we're blessed at least to be able to have a space where we can highlight some of those ideas and get more concrete about that's being the Change Affinty Network, and get more concrete about the fact that there's been a lot of playing football in one part of the world for a long time, and there are many tournaments happening. There's a lot of different situations arising, and there are responsibilities that we have here. So this is the type of thinking that will get us to think about the relationships to build and how they'll be built, what roadblocks we need to get over and decolonize, what we need to challenge in ourselves, and how we can actually finally hear each other speak as we are. And for that, I hope people can understand that this isn't a space that's very apologetic. It doesn't have to be for everyone, but we are keen to, highlight some of these ideas so that we can continue to build this learning space together. And that's really the spirit of what we feel has been very needed to create a space where we can, bring those ideas together and now develop them through action learning. So that's a bit about what this space is, what this space isn't. And again, big love and blessings to all.
Yeah, this is simply to emphasize the point about our beacon space being one of learning as a lifelong journey of exploring the entire world of our Mother Earth with each other, trying to piece together the bits and pieces of learning from the diversity of perspectives that all peoples in their various communities and particular parts of this world, develop through their own encounters with the world and with other peoples, and to then share that in such a way that in mutual respect, we can progress in collaboration so that we can also face together the challenges that we encounter and provide solutions from perspectives that enable us all to enhance our common humanity and ensure that not only with the accumulated knowledge of past generations, but also with those in the present, we can preserve and enhance the beauty of this world and then pass it on to other generations to continue that, journey. And it is in this that, for example, amongst our Beto, indigenous nation in West Africa, we say knowledge is like the baobab tree. The hands of one person alone cannot fully encompass it. It takes linking hands together to be able to encompass the knowledge and the power of a baobab tree. And that is for us in Beacon what we would like to do with those who are interested in this journey we are trying to advance, together from the learning that we've acquired within and without Extinction Rebellion, but also from the knowledges that all communities across the world have also accumulated, and without privileging any particular knowledge over and above others, we share that. Everybody brings what they learn to share, and in that process, we all become wiser with the immense, wisdom of our Mother Earth, and then we can also ensure that the journey further is one where we are each other's keeper, and we also can then bequeath to generations to come that same learning, the experiences, and also the work to keep, life thriving on this planet, beautiful planet of ours. That is, in a sense, what the Beacon journey is, and this is why we're inviting you, those of you who are interested, to come along with us. Thank you.
Can I have the screen, love, of you've got people? Because I like. Oh, you like. Yeah, I like seeing you all. I'm just asking Gail to put you all up for me. Hello, dear ones. Oh, I'm reminded when Kofi said holding hands about, I'm reminded of the Hafiz quote, where he says, Hafiz was a Sufi poet, and he said something like, we need to hold hands to climb this mountain. Not loving is a letting go of those hands. The terrain is far too dangerous for that. I love that. And this moment now is for us to come back into that holding of hands, holding our hearts together, our heart network, feeling our one-heartedness, the one love, right? And knowing it's here, trusting it's here, trusting that it's here, trusting that we have that between us. And I'm going to light the children's fire again. So here's the candle. Yeah, love, would you just hold it again for me? Thank you. So we light this children's fire for the love and the life of children of all species of the next 7 generations. May we be together in service to that. And it's lit. We're lit. Thank you. Yeah, moving on, next slide. No, sorry. Oh, this is me. Okay. Oh yes, I had more to say in that heart connection piece. Okay, yeah. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is the nature of this problem that is the absolute probability and likelihood of human extinction. And often it's talked about the fact that we're on the Titanic, yeah, and we're heading straight to that iceberg. And what is it? What is that iceberg made of? How? Why? Why is it in our way? What's the sea? What's the terrain? You know, when we've got this mountain to climb, and what is the terrain? What are these routes that have led to this existential crisis? And I love, some of you will know in spending some time with collaboration that this is my favorite thing, quote of all, I think. It's from Audre Lorde when she says, poetry is not a luxury, that right brain that does poetry, right? And she says, the white fathers told us, I think, therefore I am. The black mother within each of us, the poet, whispers in our dreams, I feel, therefore I can be free. I feel, therefore I can be free. So there's something here about, and we know it through our grief circles, we know it through those moments in exile where there's been huge and tremendous feeling. There have been threshold moments from that feeling. Yanto, dear friend, reminded me today that being in non-violent civil disobedience, it's almost initiation. It's a threshold moment. We're returning ourselves to feeling. The freedom is in the feeling again. And in feeling again, and coming back and remembering, then again, we get to look at what is the issue? If we're feeling this much despair and this much desolation and this much hurt, pain, all of those big feelings, right? Panic, so much fear. What, why, how? And I love this quote, in a dark time, the eye begins to see. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. So this is what we're bringing you now, next, is that. And again, part of me wants to apologize and go, this is going to be hard. We're going to feel all kinds of things that aren't comfortable and that feel at times overwhelming. And what I want to encourage you to do is to let yourself, to be here, to be present, and also catch those moments when it is too much and take a breath. Take a breath. Decenter the screen, take a breath. Yeah, you look after yourself. So here we go on this ride into the abyss, into the underworlds.
Next slide.
Just before we go into it, I think Luke wanted to say something about the Q&A.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, just to share this in vocal form, I'm going to put in the chat now, so everyone who's got it hidden, just take a note of this link in case you want to bring any questions to anybody who's speaking. So we'll collect these at the end and the speakers will respond to them. And you can also vote them up and down and even reply to them if you want to.
Okay, so we're wanting to offer a model for how to think about where we are. there's been a degeneration that started something like 5,000 years ago. It speeded up in the last 500, and then even more so in the last 40. And we'll be speaking specifically to some of those phases and what was happening. And this model here is to help us think together about some of the systems that we're in, including our own body system. I talked yesterday about fractals. You know, there are thousands of that. I think we've got about 1 kilogram of bacteria and funguses and so on living in our bodies. This is not one body, it's many. So there's a sort of fractal of many systems. And in the sort of widest holding, there are the laws of nature, and they're not going to be changing anytime soon, folks. They're static, no matter what this sort of culture and paradigm would want to have us believe. And there is something about the left hemisphere that I was talking about yesterday, and the separation that comes from nature within the system that we live in, that is willing to believe real falsehoods. Actually, it's quite amazing. So the laws of nature are always there, and we sit within paradigm and cultures that are chosen in some ways. And inside of that is the global finance system, which has taken itself away from democracy. I'm a very bookish person, and I took the feedback on that, and I will signal to those of you who like a book some useful ones. So Nancy MacLean's Democracy in Chains, for example, talks about how the market system has been worked so that it's outside of democracy. Democracy and the rule of law, then at this layer, it could be thought of globally, but there's very little global democracy, if any. And we can think about it at regional levels, at national levels, at local levels. And the democracy, to some extent, decides the economic and regulatory system that we sit within. And that has an impact on the enculturation system, as well as the democracy piece as well. So by the enculturation system, I mean what we choose for the schooling of all of us, in particular our young ones, the media landscape, the advertising landscape. And these systems decide who gets their needs met or not, and who gets their wants met. And in experiencing that, there are stories that are created about different groups of us, about our relationships and the agreements that we promote amongst ourselves. So, you know, the stories that say who deserves and who gets and why that happens. And then sitting within that, your body is going to have a response to that experience, you know, of what you've been told about what you deserve, who you are, and all the rest of it. So that's a model that we're working to. It's complex. And if we just go to the next slide, there's reinforcing feedback loops that are happening within this system. So just to speak about maybe some obvious ones, you know, the global finance system starts to concentrate money in the hands of very few. They start to choose who, you know, very classically, like the sort of Murdochs, who gets to win an election in which country in these fake democracies that we live in. Then that democracy decides upon the economic and regulatory system to maybe lower taxes for the rich, not to tax, you know, the fossil fuel companies and so on. And then the enculturation system decides to tell some kind of nonsense story around, well, that's okay, or more likely to distract us. And so it carries on that needs aren't met. We find ourselves in a so-called, you know, crisis, cost of living crisis. In reality, it's a wealth distribution crisis. And it turns out that people who live in deep poverty can often justify the system to themselves, because it can be very scary to think that you're in a system that's not designed to meet your needs. And so individuals can respond in ways around addictions and so on. So you can see that there are many reinforcing feedback loops. We can talk at length if you wanted to think about what happens to water or to our forests or to young people or et cetera, et cetera. You would see many reinforcing feedback loops within a domination paradigm. I'll say more about this in a bit, but if we just go to the next slide. So this domination paradigm started to establish itself some 5,000 years ago, and we're starting with, there are some advances in anthropology, neuroanthropology, archaeology, and so on, that's supporting us. And moreover, I would say that there is a decolonization of our understanding of prehistory in that way, enjoying again this Graeber and Wengrove book. So much of what we tell ourselves that happened in prehistory says a lot more about us and who we are now than the reality of what happened in prehistory. And some of it was invented actually in a competition. Rousseau invented a story in response to a competition to try and explain, to make up a story to explain who we were. And it was in response to indigenous critiques in the 1600s of European society. Condillac and others from who was a Wendat statesman, the indigenous folks were saying that, okay, you've got more material possessions, but you've got less ease, comfort and time, and that European cultures were lacking generosity towards one another. They were appalled about how we didn't look after homeless people. Women in indigenous societies had full control over their bodies, and the children were free. And it was said that that they called us miserable souls whose life is not worth having on account of faults and disorders generated by money. Condillac said, what kind of human, what species of creature must Europeans be that they have to be forced to do good and only refrain from evil because of fear of punishment? So there were very different ways of living. And what we're learning from this sort of look at deep history with some of the archaeology around Göbekli Tepe and what's known as Poverty Point in Louisiana, for example, that dates back 3,000 years BC, is that there are what Graeber and Wengrove said, a carnival parade of political forms, human beings organized in many, many different ways. There's evidence that people gathered at special times of the year to share resources and information and exchange ideas. There were 339 studies of nomadic foragers that showed that they were obsessively concerned with being free from authority. And we tend to think of the Amazon as being, you know, this beautiful wild place. But it's now been uncovered how over 6,000 years ago, 138 edible plants have been farmed there. It's this place of great farming by people. There's 30% more edible tree plants there than might be expected. So there's been a richness of how humanity has interacted, and we're starting to understand that. So what went wrong, folks?
Yeah, indeed. So I think I'm just drawing your attention to the relationship between decolonizing and cognitive justice and the paradigm shift, right? Because so you'll see on your screen Heidi's book, and Heidi and many of her colleagues who have been doing some of this research using anthropological research and all kinds, right? They have been attacked quite viciously at times, you know. There's active discreditation campaigns against their work. The paradigm if you remember, we looked at that model, if you were here yesterday, it pushes back, it pushes back. It tries to censor, there's a cancel culture, right, that we're working with. And this is all part of this paradigm. I suppose I want us to know that some amazing women are doing some amazing research, are trying to get funding, are often refused that funding for this research, but it's growing. And this research will change our stories. It will change our stories, which is why the domination paradigm is reacting, of who we are. It will change our stories of how we got here and what did we come from? You know, was matriculture and matrilineality, these are words within. So matrifocality, matriculture, matrilineality, you know, who were we in those? How did they exist? They sometimes get called our original organizing principle, the original organizing principle of humanity. So what happened? What happened? And that's what we want to discuss some of today. Next slide. Oh, now, Luke, I really want you to catch me on time here, because this is something I could talk about forever. These next slides and the nature of human beings. This has been my work since my eldest child was born at the age of 21. I wanted to know about human development. I developed an obsession almost of how does the body think and grow, especially in children. What is connection? My dear friend Gabriel Cram, he calls himself a connection phenomenologist. And I'm borrowing that term because it's so hard to describe all the trainings and learnings that I've been in with that question: who are we? How do we become what we've become collectively? And it was also the reason I left mainstream politics, because I couldn't marry what I was learning about the toxicity and the pain in the body with what was happening in politics. I knew it was making it worse. So here's a slide, and to help us think about this a little bit, sometimes what I do when I've been part of teacher training, some of this work, psychosensory trauma integration and release work, is I ask people to put, and you're welcome to do it now, to put their hands on their pelvis from their stomach and on an upside down triangle, so that your index finger, is resting on your pubic bone, and you've got an upside down triangle. Your thumbs are connecting across. So your thumbs are connecting, your index fingers are connecting, and it's an upside down triangle. And it helps because this is often where we feel our fear. Yeah, the fear body. Gail, love, will you bring up again because I can see people. Gail and I are different in how we connect to doing this. I really love to see you, sorry. And I'm terrible with knowing. Yeah, great. So so here's a way to think about it, that the fear body is made up, right? This is my lens that I'm sharing with you, of these three big feelings that we experience into this culture, as we're born into this paradigm and culture that we've created. As Gail said, maybe 5,000, maybe 6,000. The first big colonizers were the Sumerians 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, right? And it goes, I'm alone. So we're separate. So then we are separate. I'm not safe. Yeah. So the world is dangerous, and I'm not enough. So there isn't enough. And what we can imagine this to be is the lived experience. It's what Mickey Cashton calls, so the I'm not enough place is scarcity, right? There isn't enough, I'm not enough, I don't matter. The original wound, we might call it the original wound of scarcity, which is possibly where colonization came from as a felt need. Because if there isn't enough, then I need to take. I need to colonize to get enough, because I can't trust there's enough. Yeah. And then if you think about the I am alone space in your body, that feeling of separation, that could be the original wound of separation. And sometimes I call it separation anxiety, that we're all in this constant spiral in our bodies, quite often, of separation anxiety, right? And then a powerlessness feeling. I'm not safe, because when we've experienced even micro violences and microaggressions and micro injuries, the body doesn't feel safe. For some of us, it's much bigger than that, right? In our early years, there's some real sense of violence. The boundary, there's a violation. There's a violation of our dignity. So you're not safe. So there it is. That's the original trauma body. That's the original trauma body that we're dealing with all the time. Darsha Navarez, and again, an amazing thinker. Some of this will be in the seed pod, but you could also look up the maternal gift economy, and you could look at the Restorative Practices Alliance as well, Gabriel's work. Darsha has written a book and has done so much research. The book is called The Neurobiology of Human Morality. And what she describes is something she's, as a framework, is a really useful framework called the evolved nest. And she describes 9 principles of the evolved nest. And in that description, what she's describing is this triangle. How is it that we embody that feeling and feel scarcity? Why don't we feel abundance? How is it that we don't feel safe? Why don't we feel safe and connected, right? How is it that we feel so alone, that there's not enough? All these big feelings that live within us that we've then designed. We've designed the systems from this place. We've designed our world from this place. That's what we've done in the image of this pain, right? That's what we've designed this paradigm around. And it's just really interesting to go, oh, wow, someone's out there with these principles, with a roadmap back to raising our young through these principles of the evolved nest, so that they have feelings of abundance and connection, togetherness, belonging, power. They feel power in their body. They know they matter, right? This can be done, and it's being done all the time in communities across the world that sit outside this Western imperial whiteness culture that we are in. So, and the IMPP, so in this, I just want to mention that in this paradigm that we exist in, there are a number of organizations. I want to thank, for example, the Institute of Neurophysiological Psychology that I studied with, who are picking up the pieces. So the IMPP, for example, are meeting children whose bodies are presenting with, for example, sensory integration delays and sensory integration challenges and all kinds of neurodiverse challenges. Then what Sally once said to me is essentially is what I'm dealing with are traumatized young people from the society that we've created, right? That's what I'm dealing with. Okay, I think it's the next slide. I think so. Okay, so thank you. So there's something now called polyvagal theory. I want to place this in the context of the world of trauma and the many people that have worked on thinking about what is trauma and how does it show up. So one of those people is a guy called Stephen Porges, and he has innovated to the point of this framework again that he's calling polyvagal theory. And this is really interesting to understand before I just talk a little bit about trauma, the trauma body, and how that means, and what that means. So if you think about your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, that is connected throughout from your stomach all the way up the spinal cord into the amygdala and the base of the brain there. Your ventrovagal, so let's start at the bottom, your social engagement system. I sometimes call this your arrival system. Sometimes it's described as your tender befriend. Some of you will know this. So I just want to acknowledge there's a lot of wisdom and knowing and in the room. And I also want to, you know, thank you for listening where you feel that this is, gosh, just so much information. So the ventrovagal, the heart upwards is an expression of your ventrovagal system. So, you know, my face and my tone of my voice, it is going to tell you how connected I feel and how my ventral vagal system, how up it is. And when it's the dominant state, you are in this tend and befriend, you know, you're trusting, you're engaged, all these words here are easy for you. And then you have this sympathetic nervous system that activates when there's a sense of threat, there's a perception of threat, right? And there's a triple F, what I call the triple F response, the fight, flight, freeze. So you're sensing threat, and this is where the trauma body can get activated. So it's often not real threat. I'll come back to this. These are old memories in your body where trauma is. So maybe it's helpful to say this now, actually. Trauma is where trauma happens when you feel overwhelmed by the experience that you're in. And then your body cannot integrate, your body and brain and heart and your whole system, your whole brain, which is the whole of you, can't integrate the experience. Yeah. And we're especially sensitive in when we're from the moment we're born until the age of 7, we're especially primed to be super sensitive to threat, because the young one is so vulnerable. So the body's primed, right, to be super responsive to threat. And so we set thermostats, and trauma is also, you know, the word ACEs is used, adverse childhood events. Trauma is also a kind of like a thermometer. Like if trauma was one thing, it could also be a thermometer that you got set at for how you feel you are in the world. How safe are you in the world, right? How can you be you in the world? All of those big pieces of our humanity. Yeah. So the sympathetic nervous system is very much linked into that memory of you, as well as what's happening right now. And so any slight and you know, we've been through this in our groups, in our communities, in our families, anything that reminds your body, and it doesn't have to be conscious at all, right? Anything that reminds your body of an experience that you've had where you became overwhelmed and that set itself up as a trauma within you, activates your sympathetic nervous system. And then you literally, things happen, for example, like you hear less. There's research, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's something like 30 something, your hearing decreases, your range of hearing decreases by 30%, something like that. It's not, don't quote me on that, it's not exact. So some real physiological changes take place in your body. You're less available. You're this word dysregulated, you're unsettled. Yeah. And then you've got this dorsal vagal, and it's the annihilation feeling. It's the feeling of, it's deep freeze. It's a deep freeze state. It's a feeling of collapse. It's a feeling of wanting to hide under the duvet, hide under the bed. It happened for me in a major way about 6 months after XR, when I allowed myself to feel utter despair and grief and loss for what is our crisis. And it's a gateway. All of these parts of your nervous system, we live in blended states of them, right? We live in blended states, and none of them are wrong. They're actually all pathways to coming back. They're all pathways coming back to ventrivagal connection. And the great news is, because of the work of people like Stephen Porge and Peter Levine, and many up and coming, Thomas Huborg, Bonmate, Wilhelm Reich actually was one of the godfathers of this work. Although again, he's been heavily criticized for some of his thinking, but really one of the, the originators of this work. But there's so much scientific analysis now, and many learned, brothers, they are mostly brothers, I have to say still, doing this work, going, well, what is trauma and how do we come back to each other? How do we return to each other? Because we are traumatized human beings. We're dehumanized, traumatized human beings. What do we do? And it's happening. It's happening. We're finding out what to do in that scientific way. And to say what's really, Bessel van der Kolk is I think he's one of the biggest sellers actually, My Body Keeps the Score. I trained with him in 2009, and I will never forget him saying, the thing to do is what we've always done, what humanity knows, what ancient wisdom traditions know, what indigenous cultures know, is you do this. You dance, you sing, you connect to the earth, you stretch, you move, you think about your breath. It's really simple. So I just want to, Luke, just how am I doing, love, on time? I can't see you.
Yeah, it
okay.
would be great to have a break if you're able to wrap up within a couple of minutes, with a minute or two.
Wonderful, love, wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. I think I've actually done, I think I've done it. Yeah, I think that's enough. That was loads. And there's so much more. And just to say that this is what we've built co-liberation around, this body brain piece. And it's very, very exciting because it is about liberating what Audre Lorde spoke to, about feeling, liberating our feeling, and not having to be alone with our trauma, and not having to let that lead and let that keep creating, our reality, which is what's happened, which is what we've done in creating this paradigm. We've created the trauma of our bodies in the image. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yes. Luke, love, breathe. That's what we're needing now, isn't it? So
so should we break now and come back 1 minute past, so we have a full 5 minutes?
So maybe, I mean, I don't know how we're doing for time overall, love.
We're a little behind, yeah.
Yeah, so let's just have 3 minutes.
Okay.
And just a breath and a stretch, 3 breaths and a stretch.
Oh, so let's come back 59 past. People are going to need the loo. Or,
3 minutes. Quick.
59 past, people. 59 past. See you in a bit.
So I didn't have time to talk through this in more detail, so we'll skip that slide. But what we'll do is to make a connection around, again, just, well, we've done it in parts, but to go, well, how did our denaturing, which is kind of what's happened, how does our denaturing mean that how do we exist in this how we created this domination paradigm, and how do we keep recreating this domination paradigm from this dehumanized, essentially we're in a dehumanized collectively, right? I know a lot of us are in our deep, loving humanity, but collectively, we're in a collective sympathetic nervous system response. There's a collective psychobiology to this. There's a collective neurobiology. There's also a word called psychoneuroimmunology. We're also in that, in a collective way, right? Because this stuff catches, hormone responses catch, adrenaline catches, our changes in our breath catch. They really do. When we come up, when we see someone, when we're tracking something in someone, well, we're automatically tracking one another, and we're responding all the time to one another's state, one another's nervous system state, one another's heart rate variability, right? This is all science. So from that collective place, we have designed colonization and this domination paradigm, and then the systems within it. And Gail, love, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're just trying to piece together what happened in prehistory when, and these are words that not everybody would use, you know, but like when patriarchy got going, when this domination paradigm sort of took a hold. The thing with domination, what it does is it grabs resources and it uses those resources to get more resources. And that's why you get sort of over time a self-optimizing system that reinforces itself with these feedback loops. And it's kind of complex to get over. I hope we've said enough to give the impression that there's, you know, as me talking about fractals yesterday, that there's something that can happen at the individual level that gets repeated within systems. So it's when we say we, I mean, this is not sort of everybody's got the same level of responsibility, but what can happen in the we is that some of us feel separated. Certain things are weaponized to keep us separated by this sort of self-optimizing system. And if you're thinking, well, this is a bit of a sort of fancy thing that, you know, Gail and Skeena and others came up with, and you want the science on it. I mean, Ian McGilchrist has reviewed over 5,000 science papers in this double volume, The Matter with Things, about how what we're doing in the sort of so-called Western civilization is preferencing this left hemisphere again. So right back to the fractal of the human being. But because all of this comes down to groups, individuals and systems, we can start to see it for what it is and we can start to do things about it. But that's for tomorrow. What we want to do next, I think Esther's up next, is to speak about, so we had this prehistory, some trauma happened, it starts to get embodied in some people, they start to use the domination paradigm to grab resources, and it sort of starts to speed up around 500 years ago. So next slide, and handing over to Esther.
Yeah.
Thank you, greetings. So this acceleration that we're talking about from the Middle Ages, I'm just going to focus on the first point that you're seeing on the slide, colonialism and the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved people. So just to say, when I'm talking about colonialism, I'm referring to political, social, economic and cultural domination of a people or area by a foreign state or nation, or the practice of extending and maintaining a nation's political and economic control over another people or area. So this notion of colonialism and the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved people is really, really key to understanding the roots of this polycrisis that we've been speaking about from yesterday. And in that vein, it's also important to recognize that humanity is not universally implicated in the demise and destruction and despoilation of our Mother Earth and our planet's non-renewable resources. The diminishing of Mother Earth's biodiversity, or even the history of capitalism's destruction of communal interdependence. So there are some authors that I refer to, Sylvia Winter and Anibal Kigwanu, who have both extensively analysed, beginning in the 15th century, European colonialism, which reorganised the world into the living world into racialized classifications of death and disposability. So it's important for us to recognize that colonialism is not just about what happened hundreds of years ago, but this logic of domination and separation continues with injustices in the present. And this particular colonial logic was used to dehumanize those who were deemed to be other. And it's that same ideology that continually separates the human from the non-human today. Okay, and these continuing injustices and the denials of the rights of peoples and nations, especially African peoples, Asian peoples, indigenous peoples, and other peoples who have been colonized, are part of that continuing legacy that has also recently been recognized as well in terms of the impact of colonialism in the climate and ecological crisis. And this was recently recognized by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who released its report, its 6th assessment report. And this recognizes colonialism, in the role of colonialism in creating the climate and ecological crisis. Now, this recognition has actually been something that reparations movements, climate and ecological justice movements, sovereignty movements of indigenous peoples have been championing for decades, and in some cases, centuries. Just finally, before I go on, the image that you're seeing, Yurugu, is of a book by an anthropologist, African heritage anthropologist based in North Abya-Yala, so-called North America. And she's written this book, Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. And in Yurugu, what Professor Ani basically examines is the influence of European culture on the formation of modern institutional frameworks through colonialism and imperialism from an African perspective. Now, the book Yurugu derives its title from a Dogon legend of an incomplete and destructive being rejected by its creator. So Yurugu, as described in Dogon mythology by the people of Mali in West Africa, is incomplete, in search of the secrets of Ama, which is the creative principle of which he wants to gain possession. Acting with anxiety and impatience and aggressiveness, he is incessantly restless. So Yurugu is responsible for that disorder in the universe. And this being, conceived in denial of the natural order, then acts to initiate and promote disharmony in the universe. So in African cosmology, such a being is deficient in spiritual sensibility, is perpetually in conflict, is limited cognitively, and is threatening to the well-being of humanity. Now, this recognition then of what is known as the Anthropocene began with European colonization, not only a mass enslavement, but also what was called the Great Dying of the 16th century. I mean, dates, you know, there's a lot of debate as to the date of the beginning of this epoch. However, research has been conducted by scholars at the University of London, Professors Mark Maslin and Professor Simon Lewis, who have affirmed how European colonization marks the beginning of the Anthropocene, and how the origins of racism and the climate and ecological emergency share these common causes. They point out that the impact of colonialism was so profound that it can be detected in Earth's air and rocks, and their study was called The Human Planet, How We Created the Anthropocene. So just 100 years after Christopher Columbus's first set record in the Bahamas in 1492, there was a despoilation not only of Mother Earth, but the killing and decimation of millions, in fact, around 56 million indigenous peoples of Abya-Yala. And in North Abya-Yala, so-called North America today, this population decline was over, from 5 million people down to less than 250,000 people, which was a 95% decline. And this depopulation left the continents dominated by European powers, who set up plantations and filled the labor shortage with enslaved people from Africa, who were basically kidnapped and trafficked into Abya and other parts of the world. Over 100 million people were kidnapped and trafficked. So it's important then for us to recognize the role of colonialism in creating the polycrisis today, but in particular, the climate and ecological crisis that has been very much part of our collective focus. Passing on.
Thank you, dear Esther. Thank you, sister. Oh, yeah. So, so what I want to speak to you about is this scar of the witch hunts, because what we're talking about, what Esther is talking about, is this intergenerational trauma, right, that we've been in for thousands of years, that literally is living out in our DNA. There's research on that as well that was done with, particularly with the Jewish people and the effect of the Holocaust. It's real, it exists, it's part of what I spoke about around the denaturing of humanity. So then what happened to women? What happened to women? And as colonization grew, and as patriarchal culture grew, and I want to be clear here about what I mean by patriarchal culture, and what I mean also when we talk about, because Esther's going to speak later about this, when we talk about matriculture, because matriarchy, really important to understand, it's not an inversion of patriarchy. It's not it's not the rule of women. Matrilineal societies organize in egalitarian ways. They're really respectful actually of the non-binary nature that presents itself in life. So that's really important to understand. But something happened, and it's really interesting to also track that as these things happen, the meanings of the word change. So archy, its original meaning was from the beginning. So if it's true that a significant majority of Homo sapiens organized in matriarchal ways, then it was mothers from the beginning. That was the meaning. The meaning changed to archy, meaning domination, hierarchy, monarchy, right? Even archangels, domination. We changed the meaning somewhere. So it became fathers of domination, patriarchy, fathers of domination. Women began to be owned, and children. And the witch hunts was a massive acceleration point where women were not just owned by our societies, but they were vilified, they were demonized. A story, a Christianization process told a story about women being copulating with the devil, and also Jewish people were made wrong, and at the same time, that they were flying off on their brooms for the Jewish Sabbath to copulate with the devil, and the Jewish people were aiding them. This was the story, and millions of women were burned. And these women were healers, were doulas, were keepers of the land, were keepers of knowledge and tradition. Millions of women tortured, raped, and burned. And the men were being asked to betray their wives, their mothers, their daughters. They were asked to bring their women forward for this horrific torturing and this gruesome death that millions of women experienced. And women were being asked to betray one another, to hang one another, right? So this is a massive scar. There was something about its nature that also linked to our sexuality, that made sex and desire and eroticism devilish, because we were told that, well, what was going on with these women were, copulating with the devil, and what was going to happen is that they were going to attack their men's virility, and they were going to perform operations of castigating them, and all kinds of stories were there to enforce these witch hunts and the witch burnings. And Audre Lorde, again, you know, she has an amazing essay called Uses of the Erotic as Power, and how for all of us, men and women, there's a sensual energy. There's an energy in our pelvis that's been made wrong. That's part of the dehumanization. Moving on to our next, I think it's Cobbiner. Cobbiner, is it you, my love?
Yeah, hi. So, yeah, I've been tasked with, you know, trying to draw our attention into where all of this history brings us to now. In the Maangamizi, we call this final stage of neocolonialism as, you know, the stage we find ourselves in this continuum of the trafficking of chattel slavery and then the trafficking of enslaved people, you know, typical colonialism, and then neocolonialism. And if Nkrumah called colonialism the final stage of imperialism, then what neocolonialism represents is this, you know, this total, you know, the mass escalation to how whiteness and what Euro-American colonialism maintains power. The first definition that might help us in this is to say that a state can be said to be a neocolonialist or client state if it is independent de jure and dependent de facto. It is a state where political power lies in the conservative forces of the former colony and where economic power remains under the control of international finance capital. So in a broad sense, are we still on the slide yet? So in a broad sense, what we mean by this stage is the stage that we find ourselves in. After the 60s and 70s and the mass liberation movements throughout the global South, we have a system still where, you know, the global minority, the establishment minority has managed to conserve power amongst the few. If you go over 2 slides, I believe. If we go over 2 slides, then these are the clear sort of facts that we all understand. We all look at the world and can say that there is mass and mad inequality in the world. Some of these figures I was shown not even too long ago regarding, you know, this totalitarianism of wealth and control of billionaires owning as much as the poorest half of humanity. That is the amount of people that own more than the global majority. You know, wealth meaning land, meaning people's access to resources, meaning, you know, the spoils that, you know, the global North lives on and survives by to this day, even whether you are, you know, we are the poor classes here, we're kind of still forced to experience this. One of the analogies that is quite helpful and that is really easy to make sense of is if you take a feudal system where, you know, typical classic feudal system, which still exists, right? But let's just take it as an analogy. And you've got the people that manage that estate, then you've got the butler class. Is that helpful? And then you've got, you know, the butler class, you've got your servants, then you've got the people that maybe work and manage the exterior of the lands, the borders. And on the outside of that, you've got the vast majority of people who are getting the food, who are farming the land owned by the castle so that the estate can eat. This is quite important because I think it's a way to understand it, because all of these systems that you see on the screen are the methods and tactics that power uses to conserve this. But if you just want to understand what we mean in terms of positionality and where we find ourselves here, or people in the Western world or in the global North, then you have a situation where we are butlers. We're the class of people that, you know, put food on the ultra rich's table. And if there's a really important part to understanding this neocolonial picture and this global picture, because if we focus our efforts alone on trying to knock on doors and beg those who are, those who manage the castle, the king and the queen, to do justice to us, the butlers, then we're only asking for more crumbs to come past our tables, when the vast majority of the world, who are policed by forces like US, like NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, like miseducation, who are being stolen from their lands and who are working for this material, then you have a situation much like the history that we have. Those of us who are, fail to see where the vast majority of people are kind of complicit. Yeah. What I'm saying is that we're complicit in the crimes and the violence that is still. A good example to this, and I'm quoting from Nkrumah, and you can see this in the seed pod in the Revolutionary Path, is a real example of where we kind of are, which is that after the Second World War, one of the big things that came out of the workers' movement and mobilizations and organizing was this construction of a welfare state. Workers had become comparatively strong, and they were making a bigger demand for the wealth of the world. They wanted better standards and better structures. And they were, enough of a challenge was being made for power to have to concede to that. But at the same time, the former colonized peoples of the world were also standing up for liberation struggles. And these liberation struggles produced the likes of leaders like Ho Chi Minh, like Kwame Nkrumah, like Patrice Lumumba, like Winnie Mandela, and so many more, who were bringing together the force of their nations to, win independent struggles. But because of this disconnect, and because of the incompleteness of the win of this rebellion for total emancipation and not just independence, we had a situation where power then realized it had to make some concessions. And so one of the big concessions that is made in the construction of a welfare state, in placating the masses of people, was to find ways to further the harm and the extractivism that has plagued basically the global South. And that means the violent killing, lynching, massacres of market women in Abuja. There was this famous example of, the British state sending forces in to stop the organized market women in Abuja in order to tax them, to increase and levy a great tax on them to support the welfare state's construction in the UK. As an example, this is the type of disconnect that you have that allows neocolonialism to establish itself throughout the global South. So much so that countries that are said to be independent are no longer so. Understanding how this is policed through all of these systems. Forces like NATO. This is at least what I'm trying to say. This is where we start to understand that the sort of structures and forces of the world. And this really started is kind of really important for us to think. That means people here, without the access to lands, without the access to resources, and that our work here requires some of this would just have to be written up afterwards. I'm not sure where I've been lost. I'm seeing some of these questions in the chat have been left behind, and that's the sort of struggle that we're left to connect up when we challenge neocolonialism. So when we say neoliberalism, there's this big understanding that's come out that you see here of, now it's neoliberalism. Companies are now more powerful than governments. This is terrible. Of the colonization of our lands. It was private companies that came, the Royal African Charter. These were private companies, this to us and did this to people here centuries and centuries ago. So this understanding of neocolonialism still helps us reframe, the current situation that we're all in, but also is one to understand that it helps us understand the extent of total emancipation. One way that's been characterized that's helpful to end on are in the following form, and these are three. I'm going to give 3 examples that are given off by Nkrumah. The first is that he said these are the psychological weapons of neocolonialism, that Western democracy and the parliamentary system are the only valid ways of governing, that they constitute the only worthwhile model for training of an indigenous elite by the colonial power. So thinking about schools, thinking about, you know, the training, thinking about the role of, like I said, these miseducation globally. Number 2, that free enterprise, free competition are the only economic systems capable of promoting development, or maldevelopment as we call it, and that the Western powers have mastered the liberal capitalist technique perfectly, that the colonial territory should become an economic satellite in its own interest, and that there is no reason to put an end to the policy of cooperation pursued during the colonial regime, and that any attempt to break away would be dangerous, since the colonial power is always ready to give aid. And number 4, that the carve-up agreed upon by the imperialists during the colonial period is fair and sacred, and that it would be unthinkable even to attempt to liberate areas in terms of their common cultural and historical links, and that the only acceptable version of liberation must apply to the artificial units or bantustans designed by the imperialists and hurriedly labeled nations, in spite of the fact that they're neither culturally unified nor economically self-sufficient. Enough then are the clues that we'll get into tomorrow about what type of cooperation, what type of people's power we are trying to build, and our role in being the change and facilitating change makers' connectivity to reconnect and reweave the human family. And if there's more, there's quite a few pieces on the reading list that are helpful around this, and you'll be able to spot their titles. So that's really a way of thinking about neocolonialism, and there is much to see in the reading list, and some of those were taken from Kwame Nkrumah's Revolutionary Path, and the last bit I was just mentioning in terms of how this reweaving aspect that's been so clear has also come a lot out of Nina Simone's autobiography that I was just trying to cram in the past few days with some suggestions from elders. So yes, that's me. Thanks.
So I think there was a circles diagram that we may have skipped over, and that's okay. We're just trying to show, there you go, the circles one. Where's it gone? Just shows the circles one briefly. That again, you can see some of this, what we're talking about, showing up in some of these systems, etc. If we just go to the slide about Wetiko, the sort of the paradigm that we're talking about has been known about in all of our cultures, have got this story in it that we talk about, this hunger that can't be satiated, that Skeena was talking about, that happens when we're in a trauma body. And we're not going to get into it now, but there's things that happen to the owning classes in the UK that are very much about putting people in trauma body, right? There is research and work and psychological studies and so on, and trying to support people to recover from that. But, you know, we have the sort of idea of the vampires, the hungry ghost in Buddhism, Yurugu, the Rakshasas in Hinduism, Wetiko, Windingo. It's this thing, it can never be satiated, this appetite. And in the Algonquin languages, Wetiko was also known as white man's disease. And so this leads us to have a conversation about what we mean by a whiteness.
Yeah, sure. Next slide. And related to the Wetiko, that idea that we've become depraved in our insatiability, and to the point of being carnivorous and cannibalistic, like because we're eating ourselves. The system is now, you know, at such an acceleration, as Cobin alluded to and described. You know, and that's what we mean by kind of mass suicide, where the dis-ease that's playing out within us, around us, through our systems. It's murderous. It's murderous. It's destroying life, as we know. It's destroying who we are, to the point where Mother Earth is going, I'm not sure you can stay. You've become so dangerous, right? So then to go into this, talk about whiteness now, I want to just start by saying this is hard for me as a Kashmiri, as a brown woman. There's such sensitivity here for me and for us, for all of us, right? But it's like, how do we talk about this? How do we talk about this and stay together? It's a dilemma, because we want to stay together. We want to stay engaged. We want to stay available. Thinking back now to that trauma body, right? The trigger effect, that you might feel threatened and you might not feel safe in this conversation. And, you know, how is that going to be for you? And can we take a breath when we need to? So just to say that. But we need to talk about it because whiteness is a system of oppression that organizes us every day, right? It's a socialization program with codes of behaviors. It's a construct. It's made up. It was made up for the purposes of ownership, right? For legalizing the ownership of bodies, of Black bodies, of brown bodies, right? Of humans of more melanin. And it was mechanized as a colonial project. And it's not one thing. Whiteness isn't one thing. It's many things, because it's been made up, and it keeps being made up as it goes along. But it doesn't exist in the truth of things, and that's what can reunify us. There's no such thing as race. Humanity isn't even a race; it's a species, right? So we don't want to act as if it's real. We don't bring it here to you now as white versus Black, as whiteness versus everything else, because we don't want to give it energy to continue. We want to bring it so that we can reunify and reunite. And of course, then we could say, well, let's not talk about it at all. But because it's so deep, because it has so many implications, patterns, ways of, like I say, behaviors, and it's because it's organized a system, because it's a political and cultural and economic system. We need to talk about it. My friend Sari, she might be here, Sari Beta, she runs the amazing organization called Open Edge. And she says, you know, we can attempt to do it like this. We name its roots and its impacts to dismantle and deconstruct, and to simultaneously reunify. So we bake it into the repair and to the reveal. I also want to say, you know, it's not about being in the flesh garments of white skin. It's in so many portals. It's of how we experience oppressions. There's an intersectionality of oppressions that it's given life to. It's been a bed. It's given the ground. It's given fertile grounds to how we get divided as less. It's created a caste system. Isabel Wilkinson's book, Caste, amazing, right? And it's existed actually for time immemorial in one sense. And as whiteness, well, when I say time immemorial, from, you know, the instruction of colonialism and the ownings of lands, and so the making people less, making lands less, disconnecting with nature. And yeah, so it's really important then to say that you can be in the flesh garments of a white skin and feel oppression, right? And what I'm suggesting is that that's partly the reason that's being allowed and happening is because whiteness is the construct that has embedded and baked in a culture of being able to be separated in those ways, of being made less than. It's a global system that allows, at the same time as that, it's a global system that allows white bodies' lives to overwhelmingly control power and resources. And it does create conscious and unconscious ideas of white superiority, white exceptionalism, white entitlement, and white assurity. These are all big words, and there'll be things to read in the seed pod. It was constructed with precise purpose and was legalized so that power could be kept by a white minority, now a very, very small white minority, right? It was even given over to scientific analysis for justification and rationality. It's created a culture where whiteness is the dominant system, and it's still creating non-white subordination through many subtleties of language, knowledge systems, and meaning making. Whiteness owns the world. Sari again says, you know, we live in a world built for whiteness. We're all part of it. Different costs and benefits, different social locations. We experience and participate in it differently. And similarly, white is the color of governance, right? And there are some cultures outside this still preserving and protecting themselves from whiteness. There's so much language in this that is developing all the time: white bias, privilege, white fragility, white smiles, white blindness. It's growing all the time because it's trying to express how it operates in subtle ways. And whiteness is a bit, I want to say something about the left hemisphere again and what the left hemisphere chooses. Because the left hemisphere believes it's right. It believes it knows better, right? It thinks it knows more about the world and reflects this back in its kind of, in its arrogance, right? It extracts, the left hemisphere extracts and divides and mechanizes. And whiteness, there's a thing there that's happening between that, the increasing domination of the left hemisphere at the increasing traumatization, actually, of the right hemisphere of the brain. I just want to end this with this, and I want to then pass on to Kofi to talk about whiteness and others. You know, I'm from a Kashmiri heritage, and one of the stories that I've lived with all my life, as well as the racism on the streets of where I grew up on an estate in London, on a working class estate in London, where I was regularly attacked, both physically and verbally, was the story of our villages burning, my grandparents' villages burning by colonialism. And the thing is, I want to be honest with you and share with you that a family member once said to me, look, you know, Kashmir, as we say, Kashmir, was the paradise of the world. It's still known as the garden and paradise of the world because of its incredible biodiversity. And, you know, that she said to me, the greatest hell brought to this planet Earth was by the British people. And we moved from paradise to hell. And that's what we're doing. That's what whiteness is doing. It's moving us from paradise, this frigging beautiful, incredible world, to hell. So I just want to hand over now. Kofi, you there, love?
Yeah. Bear with me. I'm somewhere where it's. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. I may have to do this off camera, if you don't mind. Now, the simple thing is this. Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. The thing about whiteness is, I like to quickly go through this in terms of, first of all, the falsehood of whiteness. as Skinner has already said, this has been deliberately created through the falsehood of racialization of the human species in order to make some, incidentally a minority, feel superior, and then encourage it to inferiorize other peoples who happen to be the majority. And it thrives not only through oppression, but mainly through fear. The fear of the majority by the minority. And also that section of the majority that then gets co-opted through brainwashing to uphold and aspire to whiteness. Skin color really is not the main thing about whiteness, because when you look at the skin color of those who are racialized as white, and you compare that to the color of whiteness, you see a massive difference. Okay, so it is not really about skin color, except that there is a certain racialization through pseudoscientific mythology, right? That then makes some people believe that they actually are white, and therefore they are superior. And in that sense, also some people are made to feel inferior because they are racialized as non-white. But there have been people within the communities of those racialized as white who have long understood this, and not only battled within their own communities against this, but also found that the best way of overcoming this disease really is to develop their own struggles in alliance with those racialized as non-white, to expose the falsehood of this construct, and work in harmony with oppressed peoples to create a new relationship with the majority of peoples in the world, right? And that those traditions that lie in those who've been bold within European communities to actually rediscover their European indigeneity, and through that reach out through their own processes of rematration, through relationship building with oppressed peoples to Mother Earth, right? As a common mother of all of us, right? That is rooted also in the traditions of European resistance. And there is no better way to pluck up the courage to challenge the falsehood of whiteness than to go back and study and learn from the experiences of those who, boldly challenge that from communities of peoples racialized as white, and in doing so wrote some very beautiful pages of world history with oppressed peoples of the world. And it is very disturbing that in the popular consciousness of Europeans, those people have been completely erased and their example, completely obliterated. And instead, so-called heroes are given of the very criminals within those communities that have upheld the falsehood, of whiteness with extreme, excessive, reactionary, violence, as Osajo Kwame Nkrumah called it. Now, it takes enormous courage, not just amongst, peoples racialized as white, but also those racialized as non-white, to challenge whiteness. Because the one characteristic feature of whiteness is terrible violence, not just towards those racialized as non-white who dare to challenge it, but most fiercely and atrociously towards those from within communities racialized as white who challenge it. And that is why in this, first and foremost, it's important that we take the first step of gathering the courage to rediscover and celebrate not just those who have resisted the falsehood of white supremacy, from communities racialized as non-white, but also those who dared, on the pain of being seen as race traitors, to set those examples of, exposing and resisting, the falsehood of whiteness from within communities racialized, as white. The names are legion, from those like William and like Thomas and Lydia Hardy, a couple who supported enslaved Africans fighting against chattel enslavement in this country, the likes of Kuguano, the likes of Equiano, Granville Sharp, and others, to the likes of Basil Davidson, a very, very brilliant, historian of Africa, who actually was a decorated war hero of this country, right? Many of these people, to the likes of Sylvia Pankhurst, and the names could go on and on, June Milne, Douglas Rogers, and so on and so forth, born and raised in this country, right? I'm sure these names mean absolutely nothing to many people, but these are some of just a few, a tiny negligible few, in terms of numbers of people who gave their very lives to challenging this falsehood of white supremacy. And I think that part of the work that as XR Beacon we can do in terms of promoting being the change is to be able to raise those heroes and heroes, from obscurity, and put them on the kind of pedestals that those of us racialized as non-white put our true, heroes and heroes. I think I'll leave it to you.
Great, thank you, Kofi. Stu, should we do that temperature check poll?
No, we're going to go for a break or body practice right now. Okay. So if you need a break, I invite you to go and do that. Go to the toilet or whatever it is you need to do, get a drink. If you wish, you can also stay here, and I'm going to lead a little, a brief body practice. I'm also just going to pause the chat while we do this. I've done so, just so you have a chance to come away from that kind of space. I've noticed things are getting unsettled in the chat. And I think that's probably because we're getting unsettled as a group, and it's not surprising that we get unsettled because we're talking about difficult things. And in my experience, part of the work that we need to do is to learn to become unsettled, to get uncomfortable, and learn to settle ourselves. So if you need a break, go for a break. If you are going to stay, then I invite you just to at least turn away from your computer a little bit, maybe adjust your chair, and just drop your gaze, maybe unfocus, or maybe close your eyes. And just come into your breaths, feeling your breath in your windpipe, in your nose. And take a deep breath in to your lungs. And as you breathe out, feel the air coming through your nose. And take a deep breath all the way down into your belly. And breathe out. Just take a moment to feel your body. We're going to start down at our feet. Have a to your body. Feel your feet touching the floor. Feel your feet. Maybe you've got shoes or socks on. See where you can sense any kind of tightness or constriction. Then come up into your legs. If your knees are bent, feel the knees. Feel the air on your legs or your clothes. Feel where your seat touches your body, is putting pressure on your bum, your legs. Come up into your stomach. Notice what's going on in your belly. Is there tension? Are you feeling relaxed? Is there heat? Is there activation? Is there some kind of sense of fizzing or movement in your belly? Just notice. For those who are asking about a length of break, we'll probably be doing body practice for another 3 or 4 minutes. Sorry, I didn't say. Just feel into your shoulders. Feel if there's tension in your shoulders or in your back. Notice if it's hot or cold. Maybe give it a wriggle. Give it a squeeze, a tense and release. Just noticing what's there. Feeling into your neck and into your jaw. Is your jaw tense? Can you give it a little bit of a wiggle? Maybe clench your teeth and then relax. And slowly open your eyes and look into the space. And just look around as if this space is a new space that you've never seen before. How high is the ceiling? Why did that get put on the wall? What color is this? And as you're looking around, looking away from the computer, just looking around the room, and just allow your eyes to settle onto something. Whatever you're looking at right now, just focus on that. Have a look. What is that? What shape is it? What color is it? What's the contrast? Why in this universe did you, as a conscious entity, as a being, look at that particular item or object or color pattern at this moment? Does it tell you something? Can you see something in it? Is there a quality of what you're looking at? In some way brings something to you. And just one more thing before we come back together. It's part of a settling exercise. I invite you to sit in a little bit straight and then turn yourself around. So you're turning your whole upper body to look behind you. And just have a look and see, are there any people there? Are there any windows or doors? And don't just spin around in your chair, but move, twist your body. As a mammal, there is a settling that happens when you twist your body itself. Those of us that can twist your body in this way. And just by looking over your shoulder, it allows you to settle a bit, seeing the safety that you have in this room. And come back and twist yourself the other way and look over the other shoulder. And just notice the doors, the people, the windows that are behind you. And then bring yourself back. We're going to get started in another moment or two. It's just a very simple settling exercise because things get heated. We got a big telling off yesterday from the youth and from Kofi about how the experiences of these groups were, and it can be hard hitting. And it hits me hard when I hear that. And it hits me hard when I'm listening to conversations about whiteness. I'm not prepared for them. It's probably the main thing that I'm researching right now is how, as a white person, I am patterned. I'm enculturated. I'm blind to certain things. And I've done those things to those youth and to those people of bodies of culture and color. And it happens in me. And this is part of the reason that we're talking about the polyvagal system. We're talking about how the mind works is because we get fired up and we start throwing things into the chat because we're in these states. And so we've got to learn to come back to ourselves, to not go into reactive states, but to really be with ourselves, even in these times. Okay, thank you everyone. Those who went to a break, I hope you're back by now. I'm going to pass over. I'm not sure who's next. It's Gail, okay. Do you want the slides?
Yeah, next slide, thanks. Phew. Oh, goodness. Yeah. So what I know is that we're turning a corner, loves, because I think part of what I've been holding in our group is wanting to bridge for our Western paradigm, culture, whiteness, whatever we want to call it or not call it, or find difficulty calling it. Part of what it includes is the sort of scientism, and we are learning so much about what to do differently. And that's the excitement that Vegans holding and wanted to share, like this coming tomorrow. We're just moving into that now. That what Stu's just shared is a technology. And it's a technology that's understood in many other cultures, but we won't quite recognize it as such. And there may be resistances around it, but they're free and they're easy and they're here. Man, you know, anyway, I was just going to get sexy. I'm going to rein that one in. This quote by Pat McCabe, I just adore it. Humanity has low self-esteem right now as a species, because we have this idea at this moment that all we touch, we destroy. Not so, not so, not so. That is not inherent in our nature. It's a learned response to certain beliefs and to a certain paradigm that we have agreed upon. Human beings are good. We have this capability of doing things, and even the bad things that we do, it turns out we do quite often for really good reasons. So human beings believe the stories that we tell ourselves. We are a friendly species. Rutger Bregman calls us Homo puppy. We're very soft. Human beings are good, but we believe the stories we tell ourselves. And so it's interesting that economic students believe and become more selfish, because that's what they're taught in neoclassical economics. We believe the stories we tell ourselves. We have this story that was written by a Nazi sympathizer that's the Lord of the Flies, that if you put us together on an island, we're going to go crazy. Well, Rutger Bregman tells us in Humankind that actually happened to some children. And guess what? They cooperated and they worked together and it was beautiful. Human beings are good. We've survived because we're friendly and we really bond with our group, and that can be used against us. We would die for our groups, and that has been used against us to get us to go to war. Lack of human contact is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We need each other. And it's time to tell ourselves a story of regeneration, of what my sister Skeena was holding yesterday, of the vision of who we actually truly are. And you know what, folks, there are people across the world that are telling themselves this story. This is an emergent paradigm. It's with us. It's not something we have to make happen. We just need to start seeing it. And as climate and ecological emergency activists, it's time to start telling ourselves a different story. So we are, and you know, the beautiful book by Miriam Kate MacDonald, Emergent, or Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Here's some places to understand this story. We're actually a keystone species. We're an ecosystem engineers. We shape the landscapes that we've been part of. And when you look into the soils of lands that have been held well, we've made it more beautiful, more diverse, and more rich. We do ecosystem mimicking in our ponds and our gardens with our prunings. And we have now this ability to really remember who we are and to tell ourselves a different story. And finally, to quote, I know I'm overbooking you folks, but they're all in the seed pod, Paul Hawken's book, Regeneration. There are so many ways in which we can do the repair and the healing. And so what we're moving into now is to say, you know, from this place where we have talked about the Western domination paradigm, it's not everything that's happening across the world. There are many places where the memories are held and something new is emergent. And so handing over to, I think, Robin Ellis next to speak about young people and communities.
Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you, Gail. Gratitude to everyone who's spoken, to my elders and olders and brothers on the call. Hey, everybody. There's a lot of you here. I spoke briefly yesterday, and there were a lot of you yesterday as well, and it made me nervous. But happy to be here. Very quickly, I'm Robin. I was one of the crew who founded XR Youth. And yesterday, I talked about my experiences as young people in XR. And as we move here beyond this understanding, this articulation of the disease that is at the core of the climate crisis, that in many ways is the climate crisis, because obviously we can't define a disease by its symptoms. And what we're doing here is we're talking about the root of these things. I want to come back to this story I had yesterday and to talk about youth. And this idea that I've written there at the top of the slide, which is that youth connect a community to their future. It's a fundamental part of humanity, of any animal, to understand that their young are the connection into the future. And here, within these paradigms that we've been talking about, I would argue that we have surrendered our youth. Whether we've surrendered them to the miseducation, the menticide, as you could say, of schooling, of these systems of enculturation that we talked about earlier, that have left the generation that I've grown up in utterly bereft of meaning, fully isolated, disconnected from each other, and facing a future unimaginable. And we have surrendered our youth, and just as we have surrendered the future. And this, for me, is so fundamental to what cannot continue. And I spoke yesterday about when XR Youth was founded. And when we joined XR, and we broke open, and we joined in rebellion, and we worked, and we worked, and we brought young people into it, and we weren't seen, we weren't met, we were still surrendered. And in fact, the only community within XR that we turned to for eldership, for that holding, was the International Solidarity Network. And I will always have huge gratitude and love for elders Kofi and Esther in particular on the call. And I say that here because we understand here that as we relearn this ability to live intergenerationally and be these communities of resistance, then we have to understand that youth are central to this, and we have to understand that there are communities across the world who never gave up on their youth, who never surrendered them. That's why when I joined XR, Kofi saw us and saw us as the future of what was happening, and not just the future, but the necessity of being in the present, so that, as I've written there, we can pull our communities into the future. Yeah. And we were met in that way because the Pan-African community, the communities that are represented here from across the Global South, remember that. And so what I've written here is that we must relearn this ability. Yeah. We must turn to our young people. We must talk to them. We must stand together in this crisis. And we do this relearning by the direct embodied support of those communities across the world who never gave up on their young people, who understand that to resist is an intergenerational struggle, and that young people are central to that struggle. And in this work of direct intercommunal resistance, that's how we here will relearn our ability to work with our young people. It's not going to be easy, yeah? I'm sure I'd argue with loads of you on this call, yeah, about different things, but in that coming together, we'll find the sparks that will take us somewhere. And we'll talk a lot more about this tomorrow when we talk about the practicals. Myself and Kabina will bring these tangible understandings of what this means to support these communities of resistance and the young people that are central to their struggle. But for example, I want to mention here, and a thing that I mentioned a second ago, was something that this would look like would be mounting a true global challenge to the Western colonial schooling. In your seed pods, alongside this, a beautiful article written by some of the Kurdish revolutionary youth on the right, I've also included a movie called Schooling the World, The White Man's Last Burden. It's an hour, it's just over an hour long. Watch it. Understand the way that schooling is being used to ever more destroy a bigger and bigger portion of the human family. And understand and embrace these concepts, feel how they fit with whiteness, feel how they fit with the other things that we've said, and understand that if we're going to, you know, center young people, if we're going to center youth here in these communities, then schooling, for example, is somewhere we must start. And we must take that. We must not surrender our young people to those institutions anymore, and we must reclaim them. And don't worry, we won't come passively. And we must go on this journey together. I hope that makes sense. I guess the emotive piece of what I have to say there is that this is something that I believe we're really bad at over here. When I say we've surrendered our youth, I mean it, and it pisses me the fuck off, yeah, to use blunt language, and it makes me angry because I turn to young people every day who need eldership, who need grounding, who need love and holding, and there are so many elders, potential elders out there who are too scared to interact with them, yeah? And these are the fears that we must get over, yeah? Young people are new life, they're new change, all of these things. I'm rambling now, but it's emotive stuff. So that's me for now. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk more about the tangible pieces. But reclaim your young people. You need them, they need you. We'll go somewhere together. I'd like to hand on to Esther to talk about land
Actually,
and indigeneity. Oh,
I'm going to come in. No, Esther, we've run over time. So the rest of the presentation we're going to move until tomorrow, and we're going to give a chance for people to come into breakouts, assuming the breakout feature actually works tonight. There's a lot of requests in the chat, and I'm seeing that, and I think it really is. There's a lot of information already shared. So we'll go for breakouts, and for about 10 minutes or so, you'll get a half-minute warning when we come back in order to wrap up. If you end up,
are we going to just put people into, like, are we proposing topics for breakouts, so you just want to chat to people? No,
we're just going straight into the rooms. I've got them prepared. If you find yourself in a room without people, come into the main room and we can reassign you. But I'll put you in there now. So about 10 minutes, and see you soon. Okay, welcome back. I know not everything will have been said that wanted to be said. Maybe you didn't even get to say anything, and there's going to be, what we're going to do is after we close at 8:30, we're going to reopen breakout rooms so people can stick around for longer if they want to. Hopefully tomorrow we'll also get longer for breakouts as well. And I hope you had rich discussions in there. Yeah, just to say, so Luke, could you put the link into the chat for the feedback forms and enable the feedback forms? If there's things that have come up, please put your questions into the Q&A, or give us feedback. We will read the feedback before tomorrow. And it's really valuable what people left last night. So Luke, can you put that link in, and I'll hand over to Skeena.
It is live now if you go to the same link that I'll put in the chat once more.
Thank you, dear Stu. Thank you, Luke. Just on that sense that's here for the need that we're all, that you're feeling for dialogue and relationship and chewing this over. Just to say again that this is us dipping our toe to describe something to you, and great gratitude for your listening, and that we are imagining a global dialogue. We want to organize, we have a vision for a global gathering to take place, for this deep dialoguing and deep connecting work and relationship work, which will start to sense make, but there'll be a co-sensing of what, and a co-presencing of what the strands of any strategy might look like, right? We're not coming to you here with the strategy, and we're not actually coming to you with a dialogue space. And whilst we're really recognizing that this is what it's inspiring and provoking, of course, and yeah, just wanting to respect that there's great feeling for that. So, you know, what I sense has happened right at the end, and we were going to expand on, but we're so passionate, as you can see. We're feeling so excited that there's just so much we want to share with you in terms of what we've been thinking about the last 6 months together. So we've lost our track of time, but we were starting to describe what Joanna Macy has called the Great Turning. So if we are on this Titanic, and I want to remember one of my mentors, Victor, saying, and he was one of the mentors for the co-liberation work, well, we might be on this Titanic, on this boat, we're certainly not on the same deck. And I want to think about Beo Kumalafi and thank our David Lambert for reminding me about this, about us wanting to not be on the tables of the Titanic, well, not to be around the table on the Titanic. We want to get out of the room. We want a different table. We want to get out of that room, off that ship. We want a different ship, and we want to start to turn away from this anti-life project that we're in. And what we were about to get into is to describe some more thinking. Esther was going to speak to us about land and indigeneity. I was going to speak about water, and we're going to do that tomorrow, as well as describing some of the key concepts that we think are needed within this great turning. It's really exciting, folks, because we're making some educated guesses as a start point, just as a start point, yeah? Because essentially what we want to be facilitating to facilitate is the leadership and the sense making and the many ways of knowing of the global majority world, right? Because that's what's missing here in a big way. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow. So I'm really hoping to see you. I'm thanking you so much for your attention and your care and all the feelings present, and honoring them all. It's not been easy. I'm wishing you deep rest. And before we go, I'd like us to blow out the children's fire just for this evening. May it continue into our dreams and our visions and our intentions for the more beautiful world for the next 7 generations of all species. So on 3, we can blow this together. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow, wonderful hearts. Thank you.
So goodbye, folks. I'm going to open the breakouts in a moment. If people want to stay, you're welcome to join. Otherwise,
Questions will be carried over to tomorrow. So sorry for not managing to get those in the schedule today. It's definitely partly my role to help with scheduling and timekeeping. So, but they're not lost. We'll take them over. So have a break if you want to, and then come back, or stick around now. This is just free chat time to just chew over the day together. Unfacilitated space.